All right, so I'd like to call the Orchard Working Group meeting to order. This is also a joint meeting with the Board of Select. Today is May 30th, 2024, and it's 7 o'clock.
I'll call us to order.
So, call to order. You have to go? No.
We're good.
You don't have to announce our names. So we have a quorum with the Orchard Group, and we have a quorum with the Select Board, and we're here to discuss what's going to happen next with the Orchard and recommendations going forward.
So we can start by saying, town meeting, the article failed by just a few votes to sell the property. So from my perspective, we should come up with what we want to do in a short-term plan, meaning the next 6 months, 3 to 6 months, and then we can figure out from there what a longer-term strategy would be. So I'll turn it over to Matthew for more, since you've been more intimately involved.
I was thinking that we should, there are kind of two questions we have to answer. One is what we want to do with the orchard, and then the second one is related to that, what the mission of the working group will be as it relates to what we want to do with the orchard. I do think that short-term versus long-term, I think short-term is realistically a year. I don't think we're going to have anybody in for this obviously for this growing season, but probably not for next growing season. And so I think we need to plan for 12 months of short-term, immediate fixes for whatever we need. And I think for long-term, all the options are still open to us. We could theoretically go back to town meeting and ask to sell it. We could lease it. We could manage it as the town. And I think we should decide of those things what the best option is. And I think primarily the working group is looking for direction from the select board on, what the select board thinks is the best way to go forward. Because we felt like we did what we set out to do. We came up with a plan, we thought it was the best plan, and now we need to start again.
Yeah, I think the request of the select board of the working group is that we've met the mission of the working group. We've done all the research, and our recommendation to sell the orchard is still a recommendation. That hasn't changed. And so our recommendation is still to go to town meeting this fall and ask for a sale.
I'm just going to throw this out there. If in the event that, let's say we go back to town meeting and it fails by a larger margin, we still have to have some game plan to move forward with whatever that is decided. Like that's to lease, for us to fund it and hire an orchardist that's a town employee, whatever it is. We can fill that whole whiteboard with thoughts about could do this, could do that, which I think you guys have exhausted that already. But in the event that town meeting votes against it again, I think we have to have some of those alternatives ready. In the event that...
I can interject that, and I agree with that, but running parallel to that, I think we made a promise to do some open meetings, get the townspeople's input through MAPC, so I think that should start immediately. So that way, we would have a better sense going into the fall meeting, whether we're on the negative or positive side of that. So I think that would give us a lot of guidance. And additionally, Karen's, we've reached out from our last meeting to anyone that expressed any interest, whether it was lease or purchase or whatever, and asked them for some feedback. So that's starting to come through now as well.
Yeah, in the feedback, we've only had, well, first of all, let's just take a step back. We've had just a very small number of responses that came through on Karen, and I had predicted that we'd get very few responses because this is go time for farmers. They're not sitting in front of their computers. And there's no one, correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, that said they wanted a 99-year lease. Everyone was like 30 years or less, and my belief is because the town will then have to front the cost for all the investments, and then they'll ask to make a purchase. Yeah. And that's if I was a farmer, that's what I would do.
Yeah, the responses so far have been pretty tepid, I would say. There was one where Boston area gleaners responded, and that was just today. But they're, I think the indication that we've gotten from everybody, including Boston area gleaners, is if I'm leasing, you're making the investment, not me.
Yeah.
So they would want, if they're leasing the barn, they want a fully operable and
Leasable.
tight farm or barn, same for the house, so.
But the Boston Area Gleaners, their initial proposal was to lease it and for the town to front the money on the repairs.
Oh, yeah.
So that they actually are
They
right.
haven't
They haven't
changed
changed
much.
their stance at all, and that's
But
fine.
they said 10 to 29 years would be
Yeah.
acceptable
Yeah.
this
Yeah,
time.
because they already have that new investment in Acton, since they've moved there and they've taken over that 50-acre farm, so they're fully invested in that. They don't have the capacity to take on buying it, but they can work on their Acton farm, have the town make all the, spend all the money on fixing it up, and then they can come in and purchase it, because then they'll probably have the money to do it, which is smart.
Yeah.
So one thing we can probably agree on right away is the very short term. So Sarah put together a list of immediate fixes, which I have asked Ryan to find funds for. When we also are asking for, I asked Ryan to also get a quote on removing trees to find out how much that would cost. And I believe that whether we sell or lease or hire someone to run it, those two things are going to need to be done in any case, because the trees are diseased or not commercially viable. The odds are that someone who takes it over is not going to run it as 100% an orchard. The most common uses that we've heard is hay and grazing, and in those cases, the trees are going to need to be removed. So I think we should all, I hope we all agree that those two things, we should at least go forward with those.
Yeah, well, yeah, we made a vote, we voted to remove all the trees.
Right.
So that was agreed on, and then the next step was just waiting for Ryan to come back with some proposals for the
Yeah.
work to get done. But then we don't have the money allocated, so then we'd have to turn to FinCom and say, can we have $250,000?
Right.
Which was the estimate in the Land Vest grant. And does that work have to be at prevailing wage?
Yes.
Yeah.
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 So,
So I'm just saying, like, does the select board support that?
Yeah.
You know,
So
that's what I'm kind of
So
asking.
can we take those independently?
Yeah.
So from your list, from Sarah's list, I agree that we should do anything that would keep the structures from deteriorating further. We don't need to do anything to improve the structures.
Right.
Right, but we want to make sure that they don't get, anything that would be deterioration, we should stop.
And I think the safety issues need to be
And,
addressed.
yeah,
too.
and the safety issues, right? So if that's what I haven't gone through the list with a fine-tooth comb, I glance at it. If that's what the list is for, then I think I fully agree with that. On the removal of the trees, I think we do need to do something on the trees, but I'm not sure exactly what we should be doing now versus once we're further on signing on a process. We definitely need to take out the diseased trees, right? I agree with that one, but then we can decide whether we want to clear the whole orchard or fields, right? And, maybe we get quotes for these independently, like if we just take out the diseased trees or, clear field A versus
Or
clear
it could be a
field
price per
B.
acre or something like that.
Yeah.
yeah, in our last meeting, we did discuss that we wanted a breakdown of parcels and sections so that we could look at it, and then we could, pick sections or just like do it all, or do it at different times.
And I did ask Ryan to do that, and also to price out stumping, as well as removing the trees, and whether or not the wood would be hauled away or chipped on site.
Yeah.
So
and we have
those
to-
will give us an informed sense of the cost of
Yeah,
that
and I don't know
work.
if the chips would fill in the divots.
Yeah, I don't,
No.
And I'm not sure, stumping versus frankly bulldozing and turning over the
Yeah.
stumps and then removing the stumps rather
Yeah.
than stumping them in place, because then you still have some,
right.
like the organic material.
Yeah, but that
makes
turns
something.
into, that's basically green manure. It will break down and feed the
But
soil
if-
over
but
time.
if you're talking about some of the diseased trees, you want to get rid of all of them, not part and parcel, you want to get rid of the whole tree.
Yes, so fire blight lives on living trees, so,
It's already moved on. So it's dead and it's not, doesn't pose a hazard of spreading anymore. If it's already dead, it's already patched.
But if someone wants to hay it, we'll need to remove the stumps, right? So there's a lot of, so we should get the price for it either
And
way.
I think we had asked Ryan to do it the per acre
Yeah,
removal and also a day rate. So to break it down into two, which we had done before.
and I asked Ryan to see if he could get quotes per field. So like if one of them is rockier or steeper or whatever, and that makes a difference. I don't know if that'll make a difference, but, okay.
Can somebody remind me, in terms of the disease trees, how are they dispersed? are there like a few in every field?
No,
Is it all
I'd say
concentrated in a
they're
couple fields?
Predominantly in the field lower to the house, as you're looking at the front of the house to the right.
Is that 105?
So that's kind of the most, but here again, no one's gone through all of the orchard to go through row by row to assess if there's an outbreak somewhere else. Now is really the time to do that.
Yeah,
You
when-
should see the blade.
Behind Sullivan's house is also gonna go up too.
Yeah, so the reason why we had chosen, don't even remember the number of it, the really long field that goes around down Nagog Hill Road to be pruned is because at the time, John Clements, who's the state orchardist at UMass Extension, said, this is the only section you should really try to preserve. Everything else, forget about it. Try to do this one, which is why we had that section. But that was pruned back in
22?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like February, March 2022.
Yeah, so 2 years ago.
And so, but nothing's happened, so disease has spread in there as well. And there's cankers on the trees as well, in all the fields. So,
So at any rate, I think getting so doing the work, the immediate work and getting a price, certainly getting a price on the tree removal, I think should proceed. Because the odds are we're going to have to remove trees or want to remove trees in the process of the next steps for the orchard. And then beyond that, I don't know, we should, I guess the next question is what does the select board think that the orchard working group should do, or what does the select board think the orchard should do?
I agree that going forward with the MAPC is a good plan in getting more public input. I'm kind of torn on whether it's worth putting out an RFP for leasing at this point, because I don't know if that's just, we went through this 2 years ago.
it's been done 3 times.
Yeah, and Cindy and I negotiated for 3 or 4 months with the lease to only have it fall through. I mean, it seems,
I think there have
and that was
been-
someone
I
with
agree
deep
with you.
pockets.
There have been more eyes on it now because of all the outreach that this committee's done. So more people are aware, not just in the local community, of this valuable land. So I don't know what the downside of doing an RFP, as long as it's not the original one that we did for the lease.
So if we did an RFP and it was not about running it as an orchard, and the town was willing to take on some of the cost of rehabbing the property, that also could potentially bring us more applicants.
Right, so,
Casting away.
And I just was going to say, I think it's tricky to put out an RFP for a lease until we know to some extent that we have enough funding to put forward to put the land into condition
That's fair.
to be leased. I mean, it's not a nice thing to do to ask folks to respond to a lease and then they say, okay, well, here are our reasonable requests. Then we say, oh, we haven't even thought about the money yet. We haven't even, we don't know whether we're going to get the money or not. Sit tight.
So
That money fiscally wouldn't come till '26?
Well, I assume we could possibly do either a borrowing article in November, or find some kind of reserve fund transfer, depending on how much it is. I mean, $250,000, $500,000 is going to be tough, though. I think that would have to be budgeted.
Does it behoove us to put out an RFP that might be still just a little bleak, like, we don't, and just be honest, we cannot do the trees and we cannot do X, Y, Z, and just see while you have the momentum now to try that. I think we're going to lose momentum.
I agree with Sarah on this, that it might be worth getting the quote to remove the trees and get a quote to rehab the house and and put those out.
That has to happen right away.
Oh,
My opinion.
I'm saying a quote, not just, and then we can put it out for lease and saying,
We're
This is-
required to do it that way.
this is how much it's going, this is the estimates we have, and then when you bid on the lease, you can say how much you're expecting the town to pick up versus how much the lessee would pick up.
Yeah.
But to Karen's point, that then predicates the lease on us going to town meeting and asking for that money, which could not pass, which puts us in an awkward position of negotiating a lease that we're in bad faith or ultimately it failing, and then the leasee has spent all this time and
Yeah,
effort.
and they're just not gonna do that. They're like,
Well, yeah,
I think
yeah,
if we're
there's-
going to put anything out immediately in the short term, it's got to be, do you want to lease some fields? Period.
Yeah.
And if we think, based on input from FinCom, that we can get enough money together to remove the trees, then we can put that in there. If we don't, then I
There
think
might be
it's
people that
just...
don't need the trees removed, though.
Right,
And
then we
had
can just say,
spoken
do you
of
want to
doing
lease
some type of
50 acres
crop
of dead trees?
rotation or something. One of the RFI applicants was going to grow trees in containers that potentially could run in the lanes where the old trees are. So there are,
yeah, but with disease, dead or present,
but that, they didn't seem too worried about that when they thought they were going to.
Well, they also
We
said
still
they're
have to
going to
remove
buy.
the trees, just not stump it.
Have them up
um,
or grind them in place, which
Yeah.
was one thought that
Yeah.
we had hoped to do, just to grind them in place,
Yeah.
much less expensive.
I have also noticed that that gentleman, that business you're talking about, he has not been attending in person or on Zoom because I think he's just like tired of sitting around
Well,
and
he's got
waiting.
his own business too, so he's
Yeah,
working.
that is true, and it's a
While
busy
we're-
season. That's true, but so one thing I wanted to kind of talk about, and I'm fine with getting estimates, that's more information is better, but if I was a farmer and I wanted the town to invest in something, I would say invest in the barn and get it to be a functional, operational barn and get the well up and running. I mean, the farmer is going to need to be able to generate income quickly, and chances are they already have housing, and that is not going to be their priority. Their priority is like, what do I need on this farm to farm and to make money? It's going to be the barn, it's going to be irrigation. You know, what do you think? Well, I mean,
Getting a quote on either a per acre basis to remove the trees, then writing the RFP so that they can respond to the number of acres that they're interested in farming, so that you could do it in a stepped process of, I'm gonna start with 3 acres, the town's gonna commit to clearing 3 acres to get them in on, and started on their project. That's probably the biggest stumbling block. The barn needs to be weather tight, it needs to be structurally sound, but what you do, whatever they're using the barn for is gonna vary to a substantial degree, so putting too much money into that, other than structural and what have you.
yeah, like
is-
if they want a washing station, but if they're not doing vegetable crops, they might not need a washing station.
Right. But having an idea, for the sake of negotiations, on how much it is per acre or per,
Field.
right, so that you can manage that during the lease negotiations, I think would be most helpful. That would get us in compliance with the APR the quickest, would be having at least where you can show MDR that you're making steps towards getting the property in compliance.
And if we did that, we could also lease off multiple parcels if we had to.
You can't break up the APR.
No, but for
We
lease,
can for
for leasing, we could. We could lease to several tenants if we wanted to.
Yeah, I
There's
think-
also an interest, too, in preserving some of the trees. I don't personally think that you can preserve the trees and have them make an economic return, but if there's a preference to preserve trees or have the trees organic, and there's a following for, supporting the orchard that way and gradually turning the trees over, or people are doing something with fruit that's imperfect or something like that, that can be an opportunity also.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge with, everything Will said is true. I think the challenge with leasing off multiple parcels is because everyone's going to want barn access. Every farm business is going to be different. They're all
Yeah,
going to need the
that's
barn
true.
for different uses. They're all going to need to be using irrigation. So
That's true.
then the town has to manage all of those businesses and all their irrigation needs, all their distribution logistic needs, like how many trucks are going to be there, like where are people going to park.
Sure.
There's
Separate meters, separate lines.
Yeah, no,
it-
that's a great point.
It's gonna be a
That
nightmare.
would
Who's
be
going to
nice, yeah.
oversee?
Yeah, and who wants to oversee like 20 different leases? Like
Yeah.
the town doesn't. I mean, Sarah, the four of us have been asking for repairs to happen on that property since the very beginning, since we started in the fall of 2021, and we're still trying to get them done, and they still haven't happened because the town doesn't have the resources, the capacity, the money, the staff to get it done. So I don't believe the town can manage multiple leases.
Fair enough.
You know, I don't even think they can manage one because the business of the town, and like, not to be disrespectful,
No,
but the
yeah, you're
business of
right.
the town has just like escalated, right, since we took the property on like 25 years ago. And there's no staff, and no one today is any more competent at doing it than they were 20 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, that hasn't changed. So that's still a problem. So, you know, people voted no, but that means you're saying, okay, and you're yelling at the Board of Select at town meeting, but yet we want you to manage the lease. Again, I'm like, I don't understand that. So selling it is, we know, was the recommendation of this committee. And so, like, that's the direction we're recommending.
So the opportunity would be there for multiple leases with preference to someone that was going to, an individual or entity that's going to manage the largest parcel could be given preference.
Yes.
Yeah. The thing, I mean, when you say 3 acres, it makes me a little nervous that like, we're just going to do 3 out of the 24 that we need, and it's going to take 10 years for us to get into compliance with MDR. I mean, that might still be okay with them as long as we're making progress, but.
Ideally, that would get expedited after someone's in there with their 3 acres and their business would grow, then it would pay to remove the
Yeah,
trees.
okay. Got it.
Yeah, and I think realistically, anyone, whether they're leasing it or purchase it, already has a farm business, and that they're either moving their entire business there and leaving whatever the land that they're currently on, or they're expanding their business. So this isn't like someone who's just like starting out. This is someone who already has like an income, like positive farm business.
I mean, so it sounds like we're kind of debating, do we try to sell it again, go back to town meeting, or are we going to go forward with some sort of lease, whether it's an RFP or we negotiate with a farmer in town or whatever? Those seem to be the two things that we're talking about tonight.
But there's that hybrid model where we're still looking, if you buy the 48 acres, we're still hoping that you're going to lease everything else. So the lower barn, the other land that's
Right.
unrestricted, so
Yeah.
we're still looking at that
Well,
golden.
not necessarily. You talk about when it's not part of the APR?
Mhm.
Yeah, so on the left-hand side going down the hill.
Yeah, the lower barn.
The house,
Yeah.
the lower barn,
Yep, the
all the way down to the lake.
Exactly. So there's other land, the unrestricted, where the footprint of the house.
Right.
So.
But although I think that's important, I don't think that's critical right now. I think what we're talking about as far as the barn and the trees and the farmable fields are what we should be really focusing on right now. If we're going to be asking FinCom to do some sort of reserve or, help us to pay to do whatever maintenance we can do, I think that needs to be our focus right now.
So that would be a change
property.
of the mission, because our mission was to look at everything holistically as the whole. Our direction lately has been on to stay in the compliance, to go ahead and sell the APR. But we still have always, when we did tours, we still didn't make any promises, but we showed them the lower land, the lower barn, the cottage. So that would be a new direction.
Yeah, but I think the sort of like the long-term expenses of doing a lease for 30 years is pretty substantial. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars ultimately over time. And we are in a very tight budget. And the town's only going to grow with the affordable housing. So just from like a broader perspective, so like prices have gone up, inflation has come down, but I think a lot of people, and my family included, my husband makes really good money, but like we feel really squeezed because there's just less left over, you know, and I think a lot of people in town are feeling like that. And we still have seniors in town who are always being squeezed, like their social security hasn't changed, their taxes are going up, people who are low income, you know, it's worse for them. Their 15-hour a job is still 15 hours an hour. Like,
How long do you think it would take to facilitate actually getting a date for MAPC? I know we have talked about this for a couple months now, because I think we would learn a lot from one of those meetings.
I would suspect we could probably get a public like meeting within 4 to 6 weeks. Could be sooner than that, I don't know. But I bet we could get one within a month.
You know, I can't help but think, I always come back to how close this vote was and how all of us were approached afterwards, like, I wish I knew. I really think, to Sarah's point, if we have some more public meetings where now that people are turned on to it, I truly think that next time this goes for a vote, it will go through for sale. People, I don't think everyone took the time to look at the numbers and what truly a yes vote meant and a no vote meant. And I just think we were so close. I think if it comes up again, it will pass. So I hate to see us, you know, delay another year to do a lease when in fact we still hold true and wanted to sell the property.
And that would, so we would go back, let's say in November, we would have hard numbers on removing the trees, rehabbing the house, and we would do that MAPC outreach to just like they did with the MBTA property, to get some buy-in and some feedback from the town on what was actually desired.
And then get permission at that point for the sale and then move forward.
Yeah.
I just feel like going for a lease is just kicking the can down the road again.
Well, I'm on both fences here, so I think we should be fully prepared to go for a sale in November, but I think going through the mechanics of putting something out for a lease quickly and seeing if anyone bites, because I really don't think anyone's going to. That's another data point we have, that we said, look, we had all these people who responded to the RFI. Here's the terms of the lease. Here's how much you have to invest or the town will have to invest. When we figure out how much the town has to invest or they do, right, I'd be surprised if we have any candidates.
yeah, but a lease would have to include repairing the upper barn.
Right, so
And
someone's
the
got to
well.
repair that, either the lessee who's going to say, no, you're going to take that on for the town, and we can come back and say, look, it's going to cost the town millions of dollars to do this lease, or hundreds of thousands, or whatever the number is, and we can't, we collectively don't think that's a worthwhile use of the town resources. We would be better off selling.
So we haven't really spoken about really the expectation of the top barn structurally. We know it's very sound. So what Will might need it to be operational versus what I need versus what someone else could be totally different. Do you have to have the compressors? Do you have to have cold storage? No, because what if someone doesn't need it? So I think we've all talked about that would be a large burden. I don't think the top barn is going to be a large burden.
Right, the house will be.
The house is a totally different.
Yeah.
But I think that, to your point, with the RFI, the barn could be very usable.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think the house could be, right.
So let me, I think we need to, I don't disagree with the Jen. There was 2 votes, 3 votes, where different people say different numbers, but if it was 1 vote, if one of us won an election by 1 vote, then the town has to live with us for the next 3 years. So the town has spoken, whether people didn't show up or did show up, or however it fell, it fell. So we, as a body, have to act based upon what town meeting told us to do. So we have to look at, okay, how do we make improvements, or how we need to do things to be responsible to the orchard. Because right now, it's not for sale, and it's not going to sell. So we have to go under that premise until a vote is taken in the town meeting body tells us to do otherwise. So that's why I'm saying, in parallel, we need to be looking at the path that this working group has recommended to sell. I definitely think there should be additional meetings and education, but right now, the 5 members of the select board need to be looking at funding sources for weather tighting the barn, the house. And if there's trees that need to be removed, we need to look at that, and we need to identify which ones are most critical. Is it something that we can get DPW to do with a bulldozer versus, doing going out to bid with Chapter 30B RFP to find out who can, what's going to cost us per acre and that kind of thing. So we have to act more quickly on the short term. And then in November, if the vote overwhelmingly says, yeah, let's sell, we're in a better position either way, God willing.
Yeah, so Karen, if you could clarify, if we had direction from town meeting, from the town lawyer, so I know we have the authority to start to write an RFP for lease,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Anytime we want.
And so we could start writing an RFP because we know what the pragmatic criteria is going to be because we've talked about it prior. You can have public input and you can, we can put it out for lease, but I don't think you're going to get any responses because that will be the 4th time. Or you could just slowly start to work on it and then just have town meeting and just switch out lease and just put in the word purchase. I'm just concerned we're wasting time and the orchard continues to fall into disrepair and it needs to be farmed. It needs to be put back in agriculture, this waiting, and it's just kind of ridiculous and exhausting.
I'm sorry, I agree with you, but we're not wasting time because we have 6 months before we could sell the property regardless.
Yeah.
So what should we be doing over those 6 months? Putting out a lease for, an RFP for a lease is not wasting time. If we get no responses back, that's another data point we bring back to town meeting saying, look, we tried this again. We're failing at this. So we put it out for lease now, 4 out of the past 5 years and haven't gotten anyone. So the only other option is we're going to sell it or we're going to put it on the town budget at however much it costs to hire an orchardist and run the thing ourselves, right? You ready for your taxes to go out for that, right? So, if we put it out for a lease again, which we could do over the summer theoretically, right?
Yeah,
And
and
so what if
so,
we put it out for lease and we do
Then
get
we
a
sell it.
response?
Yeah.
That's the part that, I think we're all sort of talking about the same thing until you get to the idea that what if somebody wants to lease this property, then what do we do with it?
well, the RFP, we're going to get the public input. And so the public input will also define how the RFP is written. And I guess that's fine if it meets the pragmatic criteria and the public criteria. I think you're just that's a funny shape for someone to fit into, and they're gonna write it at the height of the season. So.
Right, it's unlikely, but
And
it
then
could
the town's
happen.
gonna pay for everything, and then in, 10, 20, 30 years, they're gonna say, oh, and I wanna buy it. And we've invested all that money in their farm business, which I guess is fine. The USDA gives billions of dollars to farms all the time, right?
I really have a problem with putting out an RFP for leasing if we don't have the funds to support leasing
Yeah.
the property.
Yeah.
And so that's what I keep stumbling
But
over.
what funds to support leasing are you talking about then? If you're saying that, because we can define the terms on what funds we would put out,
That's true,
right?
we can. I mean, the other thing we can do is,
Not
We've only
investing in the
made-
house.
I would say the one improvement we would have to make is just to make the barn structurally.
Yeah.
The well is there, they can tie into the town water, so there's water there already. Whether they choose to use the irrigation well or not, that's up to them. So we're giving them water, and you can give them a building that's structurally sound, and leave the trees, and that's it.
But that feels disingenuous to be like.
So has it the last 20-something years that we've screwed it up, so.
Yeah, no, I'm saying to put out a lease to put out an RFP that we know is going to fail because we're not going to invest in it. I mean, look, the town didn't vote for us to lease it. They voted against a specific proposal to give us permission to sell it. It doesn't mean that we have to go forward with a lease. It just means we have to come back to town meeting with a different proposal with better information to sell it. So I'm going to push back against, you saying like the town has spoken. Well, they have spoken about one thing, which is that they didn't agree with that specific.
But just to support Sarah on this, they also didn't vote any money for the orchard. So if we're going to come up and ask FinCom for
Somebody could have done that on before.
$100,000.
We didn't ask for any money either,
Right.
so.
Yeah, but if we're going to invest money in it, we're doing it, kind of without the town's vote. So,
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point.
When we drafted the RFP prior, we have the self-help property. In the drafting of the RFP, we never included the self-help property. We said it may be available. Could we do something similar with drafting the lease? That we draft a lease as such, but it may evolve into a lease to purchase,
They would get right of first refusal, per se.
something like along that line.
So that you're showing good faith that you've invested your time and effort, sweat and tears into the land, you should get first crack.
So I suspect that town council will say you can do that, but in order to do that next step, you still have to go to town meeting and get approval.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely.
So you're just saying basically good faith wording to like make sure that the person who's coming to the table knows that we're considering selling.
Correct.
Okay.
So, when we talk about wording, that was part of the obstacle for the last RFP that we put out. The wording was, I don't know if people have read it, the wording was very difficult to decipher, and a lot of intelligent people looked at that. The one response we did get spent $35,000 of his own money and walked away because there was no coming to an agreement with the town. There's so many specifics into what is the lease amount, what are the taxes, and there's a lot of town-owned property, and they're not all on the same bar at all.
And I'm going to point out on that one that the Orchard Group wasn't really included in the negotiations of that, and that might be helpful.
But the way that document read, it was very difficult to read. So if we are going to put out another RFP, we really need to simplify it as much as we can to make it palatable for whoever is reading that.
Go back to the original draft. Not the red line.
So that was, I know this is a conversation we've had several times, and I hope it would be my intention to make it the original draft, as close as possible to the original draft.
So I think the reason that the lease RFPs are so complicated is because it's a much more complicated relationship, right? It's not just you're purchasing this and then you give us the money, we give you the land and we're done.
The town still has tons of
You've got to work out a
responsibilities,
landlord-tenant
yeah.
relationship. You've got to work out liability. You've got to split who's going to pay which bills. You've got to, so fully on board with simplifying to the extent possible, just trying to level set expectations that if it's an RFP for lease, it's inherently going to be more complicated.
But could you put the complications in the lease instead of in the RFP? That's what the lease is for, right?
You can if you want to deal with, 50 bids from people who don't know what they're getting into.
Yeah, I think, and I agree to Karen's point, if we don't have the funds and we can't envision the funds being available in the long term, it's a disservice to the leasee, and that will eventually upset and upturn that relationship. And the town will be spending a lot of time, maybe some very uncomfortable conversations about, I need the town to pay for this. And the town's like, well, we need a new police car and more firefighters and another teacher in the school. That's the town's priority. The town's job is to run the town. It's not to get involved in farming.
So I'm not sure, we're talking about multiple different iterations of the lease RFP. I only saw the last one that I'm aware of that we actually were negotiating with Stormalong, and I agree it was outrageously complicated and had a lot of business practice in the RFP that I don't necessarily agree with. So if we want to remove all of that and simplify it, I'm all for that. That RFP was also written as if the only use of the land could have been an orchard, too. So if we're thinking something else, we should reconsider that piece, too.
So the select board has what I think is a successful lease with the Mathesons with the, which was dated March 25th, 2020, which is what we know is the 7 acres.
That's the garden at Church Meadows.
Right, at Church Meadows. And so the terms of this lease agreement, I think, are very well stated. It was planned, it calls for a maintenance plan. It's a 5-year plan, which you can then go out for another 25 in 5-year increments. It states what you pay. It's granted it's 16 pages, but it's double spaced. It asks for, I think it was well written. And granted, there's no structures that are on, so it doesn't, it's a little bit more in depth having a structure, but you already have one that this town has agreed to.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that'll be helpful for sure.
And I want to go on record that there is no precedent set in this town or in many other towns that a lessee has to pay for real estate taxes. So I vehemently oppose that even being part of a discussion. For when you're looking at this parcel, there's going to have to be so much tender loving care that's going to have to go into even just the soils, let alone the buildings, and that I do not feel comfortable with us negotiating anything that has to do with real estate taxes. Having met with the assessor numerous times. I know we're on different paths.
Amy, do you have, the community farm did have structures as well as the farm?
Yeah, so we leased the lower carriage house and we leased space in the upper barn. It belonged to Neff.
Right.
And so this is a very simple way of taking it. Like if you were to take those barns and flip them upside down and shake them, everything that fell out was ours, like our tools and stuff like that. But the structure itself was all our responsibility. So we had the agreement that if something went wrong, like something was broken or we saw something that needed repair, we would inform them and they would do the repair. We had some scout projects on our property and those were our responsibilities. We insured them. But again, it was a much smaller, much simpler operation.
Just from a boilerplate standpoint, we've got this one to refer to, and it's something that has structure in it, just might be.
And you can offset as well. You have the capacity through your lease agreement. If they put improvements into a structure, then that changes the lease agreement that they potentially, 20 years down the road, if they're ever making money, they don't have to pay that.
In theory, that was done with Charles Auger, but it was never written. It was all verbal. Over time.
So
For
we're
investments
all
and
in
different-
agreement that we should write things down this time around?
I think, though, that we have to be cautious because the pendulum swung. You all didn't do your job the first time, so then they made it so complicated that Storm Along left. So there has to be a happy medium.
Agreed.
And I think this committee has worked really hard to do that. And I'm hoping that at some point, people listen to us.
So I was involved in the lease negotiations with Stormalong, and we were trying to simplify a lot in the lease. And actually,
But that was your town council that got in there and really,
No, they're,
That's a lot of-
Stormalong's council as well, they were pretty,
they were not easy to negotiate with. And when we were actually on the price, it was just, we negotiated down to just them paying taxes. Right,
Just
and
what?
just taxes. Even putting, and we even negotiated, they could put the land in chapter 61, which was not what the original plan was. And they still walked away, so they were paying almost nothing.
well, you can't put ag land in 61, can you?
APR?
APR?
I'm not sure.
I believe it can. I believe Brad said that it could be, but you have to have farm receipts for either one full, I don't know if it's a 12-month or calendars or 2.
So right now, in terms of the assessor, everything is at the lowest value. So lowest ag, lowest house, lowest structure, and you're still looking at over $30,000 a year. No farmer's gonna come in and do everything else and have to pay that, based on the way it is now. And that's with the house in the condition that it's in right now.
And did Stormalong and I don't know how the discussion went, but the Stormalong walked away after the house flooded. Did they not, was it, and I don't know how the discussion went, did the town say, Stormalong, you're gonna have to fix the house? And they were like, yeah, we don't want that
Stormalong was
cost.
already planning on getting the house.
Okay.
So they weren't that concerned about any of that. Stormalong walked away because they were investing in another property
Yeah.
at
They
the
bought a
same
bottom
time, and they
plant.
decided not to do,
yeah.
they couldn't put the capital outlay.
Yeah, and they don't even have farmland, it's just like a distribution, fermenting, I don't know.
All right, so going forward, let's not go backwards.
So do we agree that we should be putting on a lease RFP in the short term? And, I mean, we have several tracks we can go down. I just don't know if we can go down all of them in parallel, or if it's going to be taking on too much for everybody, or how we can concentrate our efforts to
Well,
make
do we
progress.
need to issue an RFP if we have a local farmer who wants to lease it?
I don't know.
Yes.
I think we do.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so then we should probably,
Municipality.
we probably should then.
And I think for transparency, we need to do at least a hearing with MAPC
Yeah,
and hear.
I agree.
Yeah, and that's fine. But you're just writing the RFP exclusively for this one?
No,
No.
that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
That wasn't what I was saying.
Okay.
I was just wondering if we had to go through the process of an RFP in order to lease it. Like, I'm not sure that we do. I mean,
Unless the RFP is still open, we do. I mean,
even though
it's
it's
still
under
subject to
the,
Mass General Law, Chapter
even though
30.
it's under the care, custody, and control of the select board,
Yes.
we don't have the authority to do a lease without an RFP? Okay, all right.
I mean, for Church Meadows, did you guys put out an RFP?
No.
But that wasn't owned by the town, or it was? Oh. Hmm. So let's,
I'm not certain it didn't go out to an RFP. Any real estate exchange requires compliance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30B.
Tenant in the room, that's all.
could it be that it was low, that the value was low enough that it didn't need to go through the bid
That's
process or
possible.
something?
That could be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. At any
So I
rate,
remember seeing an RFP.
so if that's the case, then, yeah, it does sound like the two absolute things we need to do, besides the quotes, that we want to get are to do the MAPC session or sessions, and to start at the process of another RFP for lease.
And I just think the town, and it's fine, the town will just need to be aware, you know, if the entity we're thinking about decides, you know, to apply and they're awarded it, we are now going to, the town is going to be on the hook for investing, you know, a lot of money. And at some point, and if I was them, I'd do it too. I'd ask for a purchase later down the road. And that will be the path. So there'll be a lot of expenses on our end.
But we can also wait to sign the lease until after town meeting. If we need to invest $500,000 in the property in order to get the lease signed, we should go to town meeting and say, this is what needs to happen. Because, right, we're not going to sign a lease with someone without funding to make them whole for the lease.
But I
If we
think
need to remove trees and fix up the house, we got to make sure we have the money to do that.
Yeah, but I think you need to find out what their long-term expenses would be as well, because then you're on the hook for that. And you need to be fair, like you need to fulfill
What the
that
long-term
obligation.
expenses on the town for the lease are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Right,
The
that's
house,
all
and-
negotiated though.
yeah.
the house and the barn aren't included in the APR, so are we focused on writing a lease that or an RFP that includes the house and the barn? Or can we write the lease
Barn,
to?
not the house.
We're still trying to get the barn into APR, which we should know in another week or two.
It's my understanding, and I think Brian mentioned this a few times, MDR has verbally agreed to pull the barn into the APR. It's my understanding from the conversation that that will only happen at a sale transaction. That was my
No,
understanding.
I've never heard that part.
But Will, to your point, I think, I'm not assuming that we need to include, I'm assuming those will be in play as part of the lease. I'm not saying we have to include them, but I would assume that if a farmer wants to lease some of that land, they're going to probably want access to the barn. And so the barn being part of that lease process seems reasonable to me. The house, maybe not.
We have 48 acres, a house and a barn. What do you want?
Yeah, right, that's, I guess, what I'm saying.
And we take the best deal for the town that covers, you know,
Whatever they want.
So you're going to exclude the lower barn?
We can throw the lower barn in too.
I think,
But
I
I don't
assume it
know.
would be written the same as what we had,
Original, if we go back to the original, that's,
that
All-
it may be available.
right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
It may be available, right.
But we still have to put money into it
No.
to uphold it.
Well, to
That was-
weather tight it.
That was
Yeah.
pretty structurally sound.
We're weather tightening the barn and the house, and we're going to remove the diseased trees. I think we agree we're doing that. We're going to ask for money for that, depending what the quotes actually come
Yes,
back at.
yes.
Assuming those are reasonable numbers. That's what we're doing immediately. We'll put out a lease for the property as is with whatever we allocated money for, and see what hits we get.
Yeah.
On segments of the property in the house and the barns, or whatever comes back.
And I was thinking if part of that process of negotiating that lease requires, if the person wants, 16 acres of trees to be removed, that's part of the negotiation of the lease. It may or may not happen,
Yeah.
but we should know what it's going to cost the town to get them in there.
Correct.
Okay.
So you know what you're negotiating.
Exactly, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And then you would go to FinCom and ask them for the money?
Well, then I think, for the trees, I suspect we need to go to the town meeting, because it's going to be.
We're either going to go to FinCom or town meeting.
Yeah, but it's going to be
depending on the
probably be part of the budget.
Yeah.
Or a special request.
And so I know I'm just sort of projecting a few steps forward. Let's say, we get the money, like how much money, like what pushes us outside the levy? Like what amount of money for the town, either on a yearly basis or like a long-term basis, would push us into an override?
A lot.
How much is a lot?
It depends-
Mr.
it-
Venuti?
It depends what we want to cut out of the rest of the budget.
Do you want to opine on this?
Exactly right.
A lot.
We could put money in, we could, for lack of a better, we're going to freeze the school budget, they're going to get no increases next year, and we're going to invest the money in
We're not
it.
going to fund.
Or something else, we're not going to fund,
Stabilization.
yeah. There's
So it's-
all kinds of things we could.
It's negotiable, I guess, is the answer.
Yeah, so it's like choosing between fire, police,
Kinda,
schools,
yeah.
Yeah.
roads,
Yep. There's
expanding staff in the town
There's
hall.
80 different categories, and we're going to cut from one or more of them, or all of them, to fund things.
But in order for the town to maintain their ability to have a preference, the property needs to get put back into compliance with the APR quickly, so that we don't have a, scenario where MDR starts deciding what's going to happen. So that should be considered too.
So I'm not quite sure where we are on trees. I'm hearing we're going to remove the diseased trees and put it out up for lease that way, and I'm hearing we need to put it up for lease, and then we'll talk about trees during negotiations. I think it's important for us to understand what we're putting up for lease and in what condition.
So my preference is we remove the diseased trees, and we get a quote for removing trees per acre, per field, whatever, so that when we go into negotiations, we know how much it is anticipated to cost. If
Over and above the diseased trees we've already removed.
Yes, if someone comes back and says, well, we will lease it, but you have to remove all the trees, then we should know that it's gonna cost us, $3 billion to remove all the trees, right?
None of the trees are assets. I'm not opposed to removing the diseased trees, but given the fact that none of them are usable, I don't know that the utility of removing the diseased ones. You might as well just get a quote on per acre to leave it at that. Because removing the diseased trees isn't going to make the other trees healthy. It's beyond that point, and knowing either break it down per acre, per tree,
That's fine.
whatever.
Yeah.
Do we have we do have concerns about abutters, right, who are experiencing.
Sure, and those are the trees that I think we're talking about. That whole section of disease trees that is very apparent, those need to go, I think, regardless. I don't think we can wait for quotes and quotes, but those have to go.
So perhaps we commit to clearing that field of trees, and then if there's additional clearing that needs to be done as part of the lease, we can take that on as necessary.
So,
With the knowledge that there may be pockets of disease in other places, but it's not as prevalent.
so just to clarify, is this an action item that you're going to do, or are you going to get a bid and then wait and use it as a negotiation tactic?
Well, it sounds like if the select board would prefer, we can get a quote and go out to bid for that field and have the trees removed.
We have to take that action as a board.
Yes, that's what I mean, if it's the
That's
pleasure of
your-
the select board.
Until November, there is no money. I mean, that's the thing.
Okay. Okay.
Because we had talked during this budget process to the two on the select board that were on the committee at the time, and we said, can this wait till November? And that was the answer.
Yeah.
It was yes, so we didn't do anything in May. So the only thing we have is our reserve fund, which is only $200,000.
Okay.
So what we're really
So we
doing
do about
then,
$50,000 to do some kind of maintenance.
so we're doing an RFP to lease with a weather-tight barn and house,
He's giving you the Death
and
Star.
that's all we're doing on it.
No, we've not made any reference on the house.
I thought we had some conditions, some things you wanted on your
No,
list.
It's all barns and
Barns.
sheds.
Yeah.
So the house, we believe, is weather-tight now?
Well, no idea, I don't go in that building.
Yeah, I just, and I hear,
We're
well,
worried about it getting worse.
Can we just call it Sarah's safety list or something?
Sure.
Okay.
yeah, I just keep coming back to the fact that a sale is the cleanest and easiest
Yes.
Yep.
and less cumbersome way to move forward.
Yep.
It's still a recommendation that hasn't changed to sell it. And it's very clear that we don't have the money, and getting the money would come at a real cost of, other important programs, fire, police, schools, like highway, like, I don't think people are gonna want, we already know we need more fire and police and another ambulance and all that stuff. And the town's gonna grow with the affordable housing. So those pressures are those cost centers are just gonna grow. I think this idea of going out for a lease is really just gonna end ultimately in a failure, whether it's we don't get a lot of viable options, or we go down this game of gaming it out to the end with a potential leaseholder, and then we're like, oh, we don't have the money, and it's just such a waste of everybody's time and energy and effort. It just seems ridiculous.
Well, it's not a waste, because it's another data point that you can go back to town meeting for and say, look, we tried the lease again, right, and we're going to have to invest all of this money to make a successful lease, right? And it's going to be, we'll just say it's an override to your taxes so that we don't cut other services. Town, are you willing to pay for this, or do you want us to go the sale route again, right? You can't, I'm kind of with Chuck on this one, in that town meeting spoke, and we can't come back to town meeting with the exact same proposal we had before, hoping different people show up, right? That's not fair to the people that showed up and voted the first time. We can come back with a different proposal or different facts to back that up, but if we don't do something, then we're just hoping for a different crowd, and that's not fair.
Yeah, but we could come to a second town meeting with the estimates.
Yes.
Which, I think we're gonna do regardless, no matter what, we're gonna
So
do
you could
that.
still not do this lease RFP, you could still say, we're gonna go to town meeting in the fall for a sale and get all these estimates.
Right, but everyone believes that, there's viable lease candidates, so let's figure out if there are or not. If there aren't, or if there's no one willing to invest the money in it, then that's another data point that we can help back
And we're
up the sale.
not obligated to lease it, even if somebody responds.
If we have people that come forward,
I don't think the RFP process is going to be as cumbersome this time, because we have the lease for Church Meadows, we have the RFP and the lease that we already wrote, so it's not starting from square one. I don't think it will be as time consuming.
I just think we're gonna get hit up with the financial costs and trade-offs.
Do we have a ballpark, what this will run in town council fees?
doing an RFP.
If we can engage
And
Ray, if we still want to
negotiations.
engage Ray and he's available, and he does lease RFPs, then we know that he can do the bulk of the work
I think a new
for, I
set
think
of
it
eyes
was
would be.
under 10 grand, right? or somewhere around 10 grand, but,
We were under
but then council would have to come after that and take a look.
8 or 8,500.
Yeah.
But I think we already voted that we would do that.
Right.
Like
For sale.
regardless, yeah. Okay,
And we
for
don't,
sale.
and I don't know if Ray handles, if Ray's familiar with leasing, so that's the
Oh,
question.
that's a good question.
Yeah. Different set of requirements.
So the working group voted to
Use an
spend,
outside consultant to write it.
Assuming we were going to do an
Yeah,
RFP
and we
for
had,
sale.
and we had somebody
And
lined
that-
up.
Yeah.
those funds were coming through a reserve transfer?
I believe so, yeah.
right, okay. This wasn't going forward after the vote. This
Yeah,
was-
we were
In the
waiting
event
until,
of the vote.
yeah,
passed,
exactly.
right.
I agree totally with what the working group is saying. Have worked on this for months, years probably.
2021.
Who's counting?
And I tend to agree that a sale is the best thing to happen. The town can't, we've proven that we can't manage this property. We've proven it. Why can't we do exactly what we did with Indian Hill? You time it so that the bids are in hand, when town meeting rolls around, we have bids, we know who the purchase is going to be, we know the purpose that they're going to be using the land for. It's totally different going back to town meeting saying, we have a buyer, this is what they're going to do, this is what the sale price is going to be, this is the total package. Town meeting, this last town meeting, in my opinion, didn't vote that we couldn't sell the land. They voted that the select board shouldn't be the one who decides to sell the land. Because that was the article, was to give the select board the authority.
Yeah, the select board doesn't currently have the authority, so we needed to do that first.
We didn't have the authority even to issue an RFP until we went to
Right, so
town meeting.
We can't even draft an RFP for sale.
We
right
can
now.
draft it, we can't issue
We
it.
can't issue it because it still has to be deemed surplus. So we would be 2 meetings away then.
And the
But
debate
that's
with,
up to the select. board.
well, but the debate with town council was if it's declared surplus by the town, then the select board has the authority to sell it. There's no two-step process where, the town gives the select board permission to issue the RFP and then again permission to sell it. That was the whole
But it
crux of the
doesn't
issue.
preclude you, so you declare it surplus, you issue the RFP, it doesn't preclude you from going back to town meeting and saying, we still want to check in with town meeting and make sure this is what the town wants to do
So,
with this sale.
You're right, it doesn't preclude us, but town council said that it's not really, that's not the legal process. And they questioned whether or not the original vote would be binding, and also whether bidders would have any confidence that they should even engage in the process, given that it needed to clear another town meeting hurdle.
Right.
So under all of this, everything you're saying is exactly right, and this is what we wrestled with in the run-up to town meeting, and, we decided to go for one vote because that was the clearer legal path. Yep.
So how did Robinson Road get declared surplus?
Select board, I think.
So, yeah, So when we purchased Robinson Road, Steve, you can check me on this, when we purchased Robinson Road, we purchased it with the distinct intent to put a restriction on it.
And sell it.
And sell it.
So
That
that
was
was
written into the original article, I believe. And
I think that's
for
right.
whatever reason, that didn't happen right away. Like, in my opinion, as soon as the Attorney General's office said, okay, that article passes, we should have done an RFP, and if someone came in and said, well, we'll give you $1 for 12 Robinson Road, then we should have found whichever body to put the historical restriction on it and done it.
So,
But we didn't. We
so when we
spent
originally
$60,000 on a roof.
bought the property, we bought it and declared it surplus in the same instant. Okay, so we should check that to make sure, because the orchard should follow the same legal process.
Well, we
Maybe-
can't because we
Well,
bought
no,
the property.
we already-
I understand, but if that's not how it actually was worded, then we should check how Robinson Road worked. That's what I'm saying.
I understand.
And just as a side, I misspoke, when MDR can pull the barn into the APR. It's the historical restriction that gets triggered at the sale.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why.
So we can't hold our own historical restriction.
We are going to put a historical restriction
Right,
on
but
it.
we can't hold our own. That's what happened.
Yeah,
with
correct,
Robertson
it's
Road.
held by the state,
Right, right.
yeah, and it gets triggered at the point of sale, so we can't do anything about that until, so that, it kind of leaves the house and the barn a little bit more unprotected, I guess. And though it only has like a 30-year term, or was that correct, Sarah?
So the house can be put in historic. You can't have APR and historic.
Okay.
So the main goal right now, because we've put historic, and the historical committee, Linda Stein's been amazing and dealt with all our variances that we were talking about. In terms of, the main goal is to get the top barn put into APR. And that's our main focus right now, which hopefully we'll know soon. We've held off doing anything with historic because there's been too much wavering, and I didn't want to waste their time anymore.
I think a deed restriction is limited to 30 years, but the historical can be pretty perpetuity.
Correct.
So are we agreed on MAPC and a RFP for lease and getting quotes for the tree removal, the repairs, and going forward with, well, in November?
I'm concerned that we have to be really transparent on what weather tight, and so weather tight just means that like animals can't get in. So because shingles are falling off, siding's falling off, but you can't get through it. So I just want to make sure that there's going to be some smaller holes that probably won't get addressed, but you still have siding that's going to be falling off, but it just means that a lot of the big animals can't get in anymore. And the window panes will actually be either boarded or put plexiglass or something up over it.
Okay.
So, because if not, you'd use your whole 200,000 budget if you would like to stay smaller.
Steve wasn't saying that full $200,000 could be used on the emergency.
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of all of our emergencies.
Only 199,000.
Yeah, I mean, just out of curiosity, Steve, like what other needs, and I don't know, maybe this is like a question you can't answer, like what other needs will the town have or anticipates that will need that $200,000, right? Like, we're not going to be the only one who wants for.
The sewer line broke 3-4 years ago, right out here, and it was an unanticipated repair.
Or the roof at the high school needed to be like repaired, for
It's the
example.
unknown.
Yeah.
Unknowns.
Well, that roof, right?
There's a whole bunch of them.
Roofs. So many roofs.
You buy a bunch of blue tops.
Yeah.
So do you all need to vote on action items? Do you need a motion?
Well, I've already asked Ryan for quotes for your repair list and the tree removal.
Yep. okay.
I assume the select board can vote to remove that trees from that field when we have a price for it. But we'll have to wait, we may have to wait for November for money.
But with what determination are we using? I mean, 2 years ago is when John was out identifying which trees seemed okay, which trees didn't seem okay. I mean, a lot can happen in 2 years.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we were,
So-
I mean, we were saying that it was that one, that field, which is the predominantly,
But then
Has
across the
disease.
road where the peach and the plums and everything as well. where
Yeah, the Sullivans, the stone fruit
Those have
field.
to go.
That's-
Okay, so
That's
then-
a small,
Field number 9.
that's a small
Okay.
block.
so I don't know then, well, then I don't know
So,
what
yeah.
we're doing. I don't know what we're doing with the trees and what we're committing to
I
remove.
thought it was one field. It's not one field, it's one field
Yeah.
and.
No, it's always been the two.
I heard that earlier, that behind, I think Amy's,
Sullivan's.
yeah, behind Sullivan's, somebody said.
Yeah, when we walked through the property, you can, every time we've done walks, we've talked about it.
Yeah.
But those are smaller trees. I think the question is, can we just grind them in place? That's just the
Okay.
easier thing to do right now.
Okay. So at any rate, we'll get a quote for that. We won't have money till November to do that.
So if we all agree to go forward with this fourth lease option, does that change the mission of the working group? Do you need a working group? Like, you can already put out an RFP for lease.
You guys can do that, you don't need us.
Yeah. Really, like,
Are you asking to be off the hook?
I really the value in terms of the immediate next steps, I can't see us holding these public sessions without your expertise successfully. So that's one area where I really see a need for the working group. Whether it's on a consulting basis or whether it's
Tweaking the
as a
mission.
body.
Tweaking the mission.
But I do think that, you know, if we're going to hold these public sessions and we're going to try to, you know, get input and also educate folks, we need people sitting right here.
I agree with that, and I mean, yes, the select board could put out the lease, but the working group has more expertise or knowledge behind it. I mean, we haven't been
I think
involved.
ultimately we do put out the lease.
Well, I mean,
But
we
it's-
haven't written the
Yeah,
RFP.
exactly.
Yeah.
But
So
I mean,
you have more knowledge on what you would like to see in the RFP, more specifics that you can do than we have from sitting on the other side.
I mean, I would suggest that the working group is no longer actively pursuing a solution as much as shepherding the public meetings along. So we don't have to meet every other week, you know, we can just meet once a month or whenever we need to in order to keep things moving forward.
I don't know, what do you folks think, Sarah? I know Sarah's super busy in the summer, and so is Will.
I get frustrated because there's nothing new, no new information we can provide that we haven't already.
Well, the other solution is we just all show up and sit at the big kids table at the public sessions. But the working group doesn't need to meet anymore because we've accomplished our mission.
Yeah, I think the mission is complete, so I think the question is, do you write a new mission? Or do you ask us to
I don't know if you're
consult?
entertaining questions or not.
Yeah. Are you going to entertain?
You have to,
comments?
oh, yeah.
Yeah, just a second. Hold on, do we want to continue this?
I
discussion?
do want to, actually, I am curious what people feel about the working group, especially the working group members.
Fewer meetings would be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Jen says, like, we've met the mission, we've come up with the solutions, we've given you the information. So I think our mission is complete. It's what you want to do with us now. And if we want to get on board with it.
I think for me personally, I've just hit too many roadblocks. Every time I ask to do something, it's, we'll get to it or not. Even just little things like me volunteering to get things done. Denied access, nothing gets done. So I think I'm at the point where unless I see some movement forward, I've given 3 years of this and I know the property better than anyone. And I am just fed up with the way that this committee's treated. So.
So I'll weigh in.
The fact that your chair just resigned, I think speaks volumes as well.
So I think the working group is very important still, right? Because though you met your mission, you haven't met your goal, right? So I'm worried that, you know, the 5 of us on the select board don't have enough knowledge, capacity, pick some other words in here to keep it moving forward through November, right? Whether it's for us, you know, going out for a lease or for the potential sale in November. I think you're almost to the finish line, but we're not quite there. And if you could stick it out another 6 months, I think we would be there. So that's my,
I think you're looking at least a year, 2 years. And I think, and then select board changes, members change, whoever's going to be on. We've already gone through select board members already, and then it's just reinventing the wheel. So unless there's consistency, I think
Start and
the
stops.
three of us have been consistent, and then with Will, come in, we've been here, you all have come and gone. So, we've done our goal, our mission, I don't understand what your mission is, or what your goal is. So.
I'd like to see the property leased out. I'd like to see leased out or farmed whether it's sold, whether it's leased. I'd like to see the property through to getting it into, active agriculture.
You have fields that are there right now that could be, somebody could be on them right now. Some small tenant, something, there are fields that turn the well back on or just do the town water. I mean, there's people that could be in there right now. Have a sign on, waiver, certificate of insurance, let somebody go in and at least do something.
I mean, I guess I'm willing to continue in some capacity, whatever, for, through November, if we're gonna do another RFP for lease and/or do one more town meeting article. I'm okay with sticking it out until then. But if it fails again, I think that would be, I don't know, I have a hard time continuing after that. And I haven't been on nearly as long as the four of them.
And I also agree that, maybe we go back to town council and say, well, okay, fair. Maybe we take Steve's approach rather than putting, RFP out for lease. We talk and prepare another one for November for sale with, getting them more information. I mean, let's figure out exactly why that won't fly, or if we know more information and can make it fly.
Well, but we should decide what to do.
Yeah, I agree we
Yeah,
should decide what to do, but I don't know that, if we're going to go that route, we can't decide that tonight because we need more information from town council, but we definitely need to do another RFP, right? If we would prefer the one for sale, then maybe we, talk to town council and see can we make that happen or not, right? Even if we don't have final permission to sell it pending these, and we can't sign anything until.
Can I just jump in? When you say there's land that could be farms right now,
Definitely where they had crops growing before. I don't know if they do for water, but if they do.
Yeah, that's the area that has a conservation restriction.
Yeah, even up top where the top parking lot is, where the shed that the third side falls down. There, or
The
to
parking
the
for
left of the
picture.
barn.
Even someone could just rotate animals into graze.
Sure, something.
Well, there's no fencing though.
Yeah, they'd
They'd have
to bring
portable
that.
fencing.
I think that we've gotten past the point of, it was mentioned that the last RFP was written for an orchard only. I think we, as a community, have an understanding that the trees are no longer viable, and opening the property up by removing the trees is now becoming a more
likely.
likely or
Palatable.
understood
Yeah.
fact that that's what needs to happen in order to get the property into compliance with the RFP, because the trees aren't viable. And I think that's, kind of permeated the community, that we understand something's gonna happen with the trees.
Do you adopt a tree and everyone can cut one down?
It smells great in the fire pit.
I'll do 2. I have a chainsaw.
I'm not doing any, I'm not, I've already volunteered my farm life.
I went out there after they did the pruning, and then I took some of the wood and went to split it. You do not want to split that.
No, you
wood.
don't want to split
That's why
apple.
they make bowls, they turn on
Yeah.
them, yeah.
I was using
So it's all burl wood.
I was using a splitter, and it still didn't like it.
It's turns into pulled pork, basically. Shredded.
Yeah, I mean, just to Will's point, if, the town wants to go for a lease option, you could, dissolve the working group, go out for a lease, see what happens, and if you need us back, start it again, or bring us on to just I don't mind giving advice. I don't know.
I mean, that's to some extent a matter of semantics. So I think we're talking symbolically here. Are we dissolving the working group and continuing to rely on the members for information, which I assume you're not going to take your ball and go home and never talk to us again?
Will's gonna think it's right here home.
Yeah, but I mean, that's really,
I know where to find 'em.
That's sort of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I don't mind helping out,
Right.
but I don't want it to consume my summer
Yeah,
and my life.
I just don't know what else we can do.
yeah.
That's what it comes down to for me. If I knew there was something that we could do, we've already gone down so many avenues, tried to dig up so much information. We have it, and there's a lot of it there. It's a matter of people absorbing it and understanding it, so I don't know what else I can do.
And I think that what we struggle with is that since its inception, we've been looking 6 months ahead, always. And what we've always met with is resistance. Right down to, and I hate to bring this back up again, we mentioned 3 times, it's even mentioned in the minutes, is the water shut off in the house. And we were yes, yes, yes. Bullshit. And it's egg on our face because you all, I mean you meaning the county, dropped the ball. So and that still continues.
Being the longest sitting member out here, I apologize for that. I wasn't aware that that was the case, but
What case? That you didn't know that we had asked?
to shut the water off. But
We were told it was done, so it didn't matter. So there were numerous meetings all through the fall, right down to the barn as well. Water off, electricity off. We were even told the electricity was off. Electricity is still on. So the town's paying for the house and the barn for 3 years.
And that was on, just to get Karen and Matt off the hook, like, that was prior to them. I'm always trying to, like, make nice in the sand, but.
Exactly.
What if I offered, I mean, there's obviously a lot of value in, you each bring a lot of talent to the table and a lot of knowledge to the table. What if, for the summer, we did a leave of absence, and then when we started, figure out what we're gonna do over the summer, whether it's just a maintenance plan and mowing or whatever it is. Maybe we are able to find some money to get some trees removed. But then, as we start gearing up towards fall town meeting, you kind of get the band back together again to, I mean, if the push, if the goal is to bring it back and to sell the orchard and at fall town meeting, then I think if that's going to happen, that it should be this body that kind of brings that to.
Yeah, but you'll still have to run the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. They'll need to do, and I don't know if the goal for them would be on 2 fronts, like to educate folks and to gather input. I don't have that clear. It
You
can
know,
be
like at
both.
MBTA, you know,
Can we get-
gathered points of, you know, but we also, you know, and folks said, well, you know, I want to keep it conservation, you know, then folks, it's not conservation land that we're talking about here, you know, so it can be both, I think.
What is your deadline for the warrant article in the fall?
September 15th.
Yeah, mid-September.
So you'd already have to know, beginning of August, what the goal is. So, and this is June. So if you go on a hiatus, I don't think there's enough to come.
Yeah, and if you went for a lease, you'd have to, like, get it organized, get one public input session, put it out for bid, get the bids back
I think that it-
between now and September 15th.
Can we ask the audience, because a lot of people here have been at a lot of meetings, and I'm curious what their thoughts are as to what you think of the working group, and if you think it should be a fresh set of eyes, or, you know, what does the
And
group
you have to
think?
say your name and address.
And can we keep it brief?
Yeah.
I just, before we do that, I just want to say that I do think that there's benefit to what Sarah was saying, that if there's areas of the orchard that can be, you know, with hay or whatever over the course of the summer, actions speak louder than words. If you put that into action, I don't think you need, and there's somebody doing something, that I don't think you would need the MAPC meetings. The community, I would assume, would like to see action.
We promised that, though.
Well, that was contingent on sale. That was,
Oh, okay.
if you
If
agree to
we're-
this is how we'll
Okay,
proceed.
that's a good point.
If we're bringing an article in the fall, we should have the MAPC meetings sometime before that.
We should.
As far as Will's idea, Sarah's idea, whoever wants to take credit, of doing something, what do we have to do to make that happen? I don't, that,
Well, we'd have to post it some way, somehow.
So
Similar to what,
I mean, we can commit to investigating how to
Yeah,
do
that's
that. So
why
I
I'm
just don't
asking
know
more
how.
specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
Can we, if we take public input, can we limit it to 2 minutes a person?
Yep. You can limit it to 30 seconds if you want. Get up, say your name, sit back down.
I think 2 minutes is good.
All right.
Okay.
Kristen Kazokis, 6 Cottage Way. I believe the Orchard Working Group is a valuable asset, and I think it also is, they've been the face of this and through the education. I think it's also important, the whole trust factor, in town with the select board and making sure that what they want to do or what needs to happen is actually going to be following through. So I think the Orchard Working Group is an invaluable asset to building that trust with the community. And I definitely think that education and folks having an opportunity to say what they want done in those public meetings would be helpful.
Vince Stoll, Research Dublin. As far as the Orchard Working Group goes, tremendous respect for them, and having watched the goings on over the last year plus that I've been attending these meetings, I think they're an invaluable resource. You guys have done yeoman's work in terms of bringing this issue to the fore, and it would be a mistake to dissolve the working group, in my opinion. One of the things that I'm struggling with is the time frame, and it's my understanding that there's a mechanism that citizens of the town can utilize to call a special meeting, a special town meeting, to kind of accelerate the process, because several of you mentioned it, Jen in particular, that we were so close to winning. And I get your point about like the town spoke, but just when it comes to votes on for when you're running for election on the select board, the town speaks at one point 1 year and at another point another year. Like things change. So I'd be in favor of trying to accelerate the process by pushing forward something, but I don't want to get involved in that if it's going to kind of queer the process, if you will. So that's it.
Don McIver, 43 Foster Street. Yeah, I also agree you've done a lot of work, a lot of hard work. It's not unusual for boards to get ahead of the public and understand things differently. But I think the things that you can do, last me and Karen mentioned doing RFI for leasing. There's no expectation that something is given out, but be just for leasing. I think that's useful information. You're gathering price points for what it takes to restore different areas, and that's the cost for the town to do it at prevailing wages more than, say, a private owner or a nonprofit could do. They could probably get grants, which you can't, because you've already saturated the possibility. You have the APR grant, you have the self-help grant. State and other folks won't give you grants because they think it's already protected, whereas nonprofits probably could get money given the situation they're in. So I think that's useful. I think very valuable having MAPC come in. I think the thing that's missing is actually getting the public, and especially the neighbors, to talk about what is important for them to protect at the orchard. And that's completely missing. I mean, it's gathering information. You look through the file for what was done for the Morrison Orchard, which you've done when you put together your timelines and so on. You saw all the characteristics that people thought were important for preserving, for protecting there, from historic to scenic to conservation. One of the things that should happen with MAPC is to reaffirm that what's important for the neighbors in the area. Why are they there? What do they think should be
5
protected?
seconds.
Excuse me?
5 seconds.
Well, yeah, you either can listen or you can just, say shove it and push it. I mean, I think it's a public process. I think you need to listen.
We
I
have
think
been
that's
listening, and you come to every meeting, and we call on you every time. Every time. We've given you a lot of opportunity to speak.
Are you hearing what I'm saying, that you should
Yes.
listen to the public, the MAPC should do it, not you?
We've already talked
facilitate
about
it?
the MAPC doing
I think
it.
we supply definitely
Yeah.
support everything.
We also.
And I think that'd be very valuable, and that can be something that can happen now. And just, since I'm being closed down, I think if you look at what happened at Shoreland Orchard, which isn't necessarily what I'm saying, what we follow, but it's very similar in Leominster. You look at what their goals are. One is restore, which, the mission statement, which is what you're trying to do. One is preserve, what goes into preserve. The third is operational, the agricultural stuff. You have a good handle on the agricultural part, but I think the other things you need to listen to the public on.
Yes, sir, in the back.
Rob Brown's 25 Juniper Road. So I've spoken with Diane Crory. I'm capable of misunderstanding things, but I will tell you that I've learned it's a 200-person registered confirmed petition. It then has to be processed by the town clerk's office to validate the signatures. It is then presented by Diane to the select board. You have 35 days maximum to take action and call for the special town meeting. What I don't know, because I respect everything with regard to your group, you guys are heroes. Having said that, what I think you could consider doing is the discussions I heard at the last meeting. Brad resigning, Karen resigning, you all contemplating resigning. We don't have the newspaper. We don't have a way of communicating. It's a real sore spot and a weak spot in this town. We need to hear that in light of the May 7th vote, that these are the repercussions. Hit us over the head with it. It seems like Brian needed to state that with regard to the vote that he successfully, I believe, got for the planning board of saying, if you don't approve this, we're going to be blacklisted with regard to grants. I feel like there's something similar with regard to the public needs to be hit over the head with regard to a group that's been meeting through 2021 and doing their best is unable to motivate you. So therefore, here are the options you're giving us. I won't go over them. You're familiar with them. If I knew that you folks, I said this last meeting, not with the level of detail, that Diane estimates at $16,500 for the 200-person petition that I said. But if I knew that that would be supported, I'd begin it tomorrow. I'd begin it and align myself with others people. I'm willing to have my name put out there associated with it for others to come to me and say, yes, give me the exact same form. I know it's the exact same wording, virtually the exact same wording that was voted down can be put forward by a resident in this petition process. So I thank you for your time.
Can I respond? Actually, I want to respond since Vin and Rob both spoke to that. I think I appreciate your support. I think probably the best solution would be to come to a town meeting, and whether it's a special town meeting or in November, with more information about the pros and cons of buying, and specifically around the cost of leasing, I think would be a stronger argument. I think, Mark stated earlier, like it's kind of not fair to just bring the same thing back and hope a different set of people show up, right? Like we should be, taking that vote as information, and we should be responding to it with a better proposal with more information and more clarity. And we may also get a different set of people, or the public outreach may make a difference as well. But I don't want to run forward with a town meeting without setting all those things up ahead of time.
I wasn't timing out. Can I comment? Respect it. However, you've got experience in this town with regard to multiple votes before you get the vote that's recommended.
Yeah.
This is another one of those situations that I feel strongly. If anything, I see you about to lose a group of valued people with valued years, more knowledge than you folks say you have, that we're on the verge of losing all of them. And that seems very reasonable, very human. So therefore, that's motivating other people. everybody I speak with is the same thing. I can flip them from standpoint of signing a petition to do the sale to, okay, then since you're arguing against that, then you're supporting the property tax increases. Oh, no, it's simple. So with all due respect, I think Littleton is established. It takes multiple votes to get enough public awareness. And in that regard, with all due respect to the points made, I don't view the town vote and a negative town vote as being definitive and having to hold up 6 months where I'm dying to think about how how we're going to get the money for all the other things. You cut $3.5 million. That's terrifying with regard to what the repercussions are. Thank you.
Erica, good morning, 6 Fox Lane. I just think the public outreach is the biggest part. I don't think people think it's either we sell or we lease necessarily. They seem to think there's this unicorn out there where we keep all the trees and it's this lovely, orchard that just is owned by the town and it keeps our rural character. And so I think people need to know the reality. They need to know that even if we lease it, most of the trees are going anyway. If we do lease it, the reality of what that looks like for our budget, for our schools, for our police, for our fire, for our roads, for everything. I agree that it was such a close vote, and I think a lot of people were uninformed. They really didn't know what they were voting on. They thought a vote against this was saving the orchard. And there isn't a vote to save the orchard. And so I really think we need to, over the summer and into the fall, double down on informing the public. And I think we saw that, right, with the MBTA vote, and that we need to bring people in and talk to them and show them the reality of the situation that we are in as a town. And the 10-minute presentations at town meeting just don't do it, especially when you have, people coming up, like I said, these unicorn ideas that aren't based in reality, that sound lovely, but won't work.
How do you think we could go about getting the word out there better? I mean, we kind of exhausted what we thought where people would look for information, and we don't have a town newspaper.
We do have a new tool with the town newsletter, and the Orchard Committee can submit it for that every month, every time it goes out.
Is that a paper newsletter or an electronic
e-newsletter? E-newsletter.
So is that part of the problem?
I think that is part of the problem, but I also think for some reason there's a difference to people about the Orchard Group is having a meeting and the public is welcome to, this is a public meeting where we're going to talk about the orchard. I can't tell you exactly what the difference is, but this setup, right, I think for some people is intimidating, that you are up there and you are the experts and we're listening in, and maybe we have an opportunity to respond. Whereas if it's kind of like what the planning board did for the MBTA, where it is, you're sitting down, you're working through solutions, and you're seeing how things, oh, that won't work, or this is what happens if we do this. I don't know. I think a different format would be helpful.
Yeah, and so, stop me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of us disagree that we should have public input sessions that are run through MAPC. I think we've all said that that should happen, and sooner than later, and there should be a few of them, but I think that really, because the mission of the working group is fulfilled, and there's not a new direction, that responsibility sits with the town for them to do that work. Just to have MAPC come in and run those discussions and those meetings, we can be present, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, I think we have to be present.
I think you're the experts in the room, and we'd be running the meeting if people would be asking questions, and like, well, we'd have to defer, right? We don't know as much about, we weren't at all the meetings for the past.
I think probably the other thing, if nothing else, that vote galvanized people and made this a discussion, a topic, and if we have public information sessions, I suspect more people will show up now than they would have before the town meeting vote. So that may be, another way that we got the word out by failing.
Can I ask an opinion of the working group? There's been a couple comments about holding a special town meeting before November. Do you see any reason or advantage of doing that, rather than potentially taking this back in November as a sale?
I'm very concerned that we're pushing out further. And from an agricultural standpoint, we're losing ground. The buildings structurally are losing ground. So the longer we wait. So I was nervous if this one didn't pass, because I knew it's going to be a whole nother cycle. And
So my question is, does September 1st versus November 1st change the dynamics
the
that much?
committee's already spoken about, we, meetings ago, talked about doing a special meeting if we thought. I even made a motion to withhold and do public outreach and not put it forth to the town meeting, because we were nervous. But as Amy said, we've done our mission. We gave it to you all to then be the PR for that. So we don't have the vehicles to really get the vote out as much. I think we did as much, especially many people on the committee did as much as they physically could. So I do see an advantage of doing it, but I really wanted to have an MAPC meeting. Since town vote, Karen corrected us that, our promise of doing the MAPC was for a sale, but I think anytime we have an outreach, I'm disappointed to hear it's going to take another 4 to 6 weeks to come up with a meeting.
It might be quicker, I don't know.
With due regard, we've been talking about these meetings, and it's just get put on the burner for the last month or two. It's already been backburnered.
So, I'm not disagreeing that the meeting should have happened before, but I'm not sure I understand. Unless there's a vote or decision coming up, what's the push to do the meeting sooner rather than later? If we're not voting
to have the lease done and really have a farmer hitting the ground in February, things have to be pruned, or if they have to order their seeds, or they need to get time on the ground, they can do that, unless you would let them get in early through your negotiation, which probably is not going to happen.
What I'm saying is, if the select board's deciding this for a lease, if we're going forward with a lease, then there's less push to have these meetings because we don't actually need permission. We need the permission and the education if we're doing something outside of what we can do as a board or committee. And if there's no vote coming up for this, if you did an outreach meeting for MAPC in June for a vote that's happening in November, no one's going to remember, right? So there's no big push to do an education campaign for something that's not happening quickly.
With due regard, I think that's a bold statement. I think that any time that you can take input from the townspeople, from future farmers, of what they might like to see as potential use for a lease, I think that is a win.
That's a different meeting.
Either way, whether we're talking a lease or a purchase, I think that especially coming up to having more input on points as well, like what's important that we need to, and the RFI was probably the most meaningful input that we got in the last 6 months.
I agree if we're going out for running these meetings to get input for what we want to do going forward. But if we've already decided what we want to do and it's an educational campaign, those are different meetings. That's what I'm saying.
I think it's the optics. Like Brad said for the longest time, the town wants to be able to be involved in the process and to have these public meetings makes them feel like they're part of the process. So it is optics, and that's where we failed before, was optics.
Yeah,
So,
definitely
to Sarah's
much
point,
more transparency.
absolutely, we should have 2 meetings as soon as possible.
But we always said when we went, the plan always was when we went to an RFP for sale, if we were given that permission, that we were going to do those public input sessions regardless. So that was always a thing. That was never not a thing.
We just didn't pull the trigger on scheduling them.
Because we were waiting for town meeting.
No, we talked about doing them in either case, because we hadn't crafted the final RFP for sale.
So MAPC meeting could yield a special town meeting if there's enough education, interest, et cetera. Somebody chooses to go with a petition or something and move that along.
They're independent, right? But yeah, it could aid in like getting something passed, I suppose.
I think it's the timing, September versus November, that's a couple of months. And again, to the point of, that's getting somebody in their boots on the ground as soon as possible. We'll lose, if we wait till November, we're gonna lose 2025 farm
Yeah,
season.
there's already people that have.
Let me throw something out there. It's from the kind of touching on the PR part of it. I'm reaching back to when we were on, I guess we still are on the school working group, but one of the things that we felt was important from a PR standpoint was to get the message out there as simply as possible. And so we determined we were going to do an infographic. And so it was, basically cartoons that told the story. And if we did something that said, if we do nothing, this is what's going to happen. The state comes in and takes it over. And if we sell, this is what could happen. If we lease, it's a little more difficult picture to paint, but if we can do something that's going to simplify it as much as possible, and it's something we can get out there, maybe we're able to put it in with the light and water bills to get a message out there that's going to be clear, knowing that we're getting the message to everybody. I mean, that is a tool that could be used to try to educate, but it's a matter of creating that document. I mean, Light and Water had the engineering firm that they had hired, they had staff that...
Do you still have that? Do you have a copy of that?
Sure I do.
Well, we had talked about putting almost like a flow chart. Yes is this, no is this, and flowing down from there.
Same
So it's
idea,
just,
Jen.
it's doing it that way, but I would love to see the one you're speaking of.
Yeah, I'll try and put my hands on it one way or another.
So, for you, Karen, what we talked about before the RFP for sale, we couldn't do that without town meeting approval, but if we're having to spend money on a lease, it's probably going to be the same book. We can't sign a lease if we don't have the funds, if we have to spend any money in the lease.
We have the
So-
legal authority to sign a lease, we don't have the legal authority to spend any money on a lease.
So we're probably in the same boat on a sale or a lease, if
And
we
we
have
could
to invest
I
any
mean,
money in the property.
We can declare the orchard surplus right now, if we wanted. Select board can do that. I think there was a consensus that that was not the right thing to do.
From an optics standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, not from an optics standpoint, from a that I think the thought was that, it was really important that folks this was too much, folks had too much invested in this for us to make that decision unilaterally. But we could do it right now if we wanted. There's a quorum.
It's not on the agenda.
It's not on the agenda, but
I think we want all your members here.
And I think that we'd want to have some public input for that as well.
I mean,
Make sure that
I
we're
also think we
hearing all
need
sides
to
of it.
increase our sarcasm sensors a little bit. But yeah, so we don't have the money to spend, but we have the authority to lease. And we don't have the authority to sell. And we can work on an RFP to sell, but we cannot issue it.
But we could work in an RFP for a lease, but we couldn't sign a lease because if it required us to spend any money.
If it required us to spend money. If
It's
we-
sign a lease, we just can't commit to like doing the repairs or the,
If the lease cost, if we have no financial commitment to the lease other than what they're paying us.
yes.
Self-funding.
Can we take another public question?
Yeah, just a question. If you declared it surplus, do you have to then sell it?
No.
So could you declare it surplus in order to put out the RFPs to sell so that you can then come to town meeting? Like Steve said, with RFPs in hand, and this is what this farmer would do with it, and this is...
So we, technically, we don't need to go to town meeting to sell it.
Right.
However, I think the select board agreed that that was not the right thing to do, and we wouldn't do it. So we could declare it surplus, and we could go and negotiate a sale with someone, but I think that would not be in good faith, because if we're intending to go to town meeting, we're right back where we started, which is like, you know, how are we legally negotiating with this person if we don't have the right to sell it? Because we're waiting for someone else to approve it, waiting for the town to approve it.
And how many people, just from a market perspective, folks aren't, especially in light of the last sale, aren't going to be willing to invest a whole lot of time and effort into going after buying the property if it's contingent on a town meeting vote.
Yeah, sorry, a name and street address again.
Rob Brown's 25 Juniper Road. Action is meaningful to many of you for different reasons. I would argue that reluctance to declare surplus, reluctance to take action should be met with a challenge, which I'm making, with regard to, so is it better to forestall time to, you know, I respect Sarah's perspective, 1 to 2 year time frame to spend monies that we don't have as a town that are going to come from something else. I would argue that bold action, this is one that requires bold action. Had you lost the MBTA, wouldn't you be seeking for what can we do next because that's a death blow? I kind of feel like this vote has been a death blow with regard to the town's budgets and other aspects that are emerging in the town that have to be dealt with, that are critical needs. I think the time for bold action, if you've got the authority, you're there because we gave you that authority. Some may not like it, so be it. You're put in these positions for a reason.
Will had a good statistic of the mowing versus taking out the trees, and where if we'd spend 20 years, $20,000 for 20 years, that's $200,000. That, what was that analogy that you had?
$20,000 for 10 years.
For 10 years. Us
Just
spending
For mowing?
trees out. Right.
and converting it.
Mowing for 10 years, that's $20,000 a year, it's $200,000, and if we just.
Spend $200,000 removing trees. So that somebody,
turns into
somebody else can mow it.
somebody in their
Such a-
department.
You said it better than
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Just.
Just had to start.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always about bold action, but I do think that should be a full Board of Select meeting on an agenda with public notice.
It has to be.
Yeah.
When's
Yeah,
the next
sarcasm.
The 10th, I think.
I think you should put it on your agenda for discussion, for action.
Mr. Chair.
And with that, post the date for the next MAPC.
Yeah,
We need to get that posted.
yeah.
Well,
You
we
need,
have
someone
to-
needs to call them.
We need to talk to MAPC and find out their availability, I think.
Yeah, someone needs to call them and find out. And if you're going to have that information by the 10th.
Is Ryan a representative to the MAPC?
I don't know who the representative is, but Ryan is the person I would go to, so.
I believe he's one of the designated.
Okay. So we'll work on setting up the MAPC meeting. We'll start with council on the RFP business, whether, since we don't have, if it's going to cost us money to lease the property, if we have to invest anything, we don't have that authority we should start pursuing.
I'd like to ask the question of town council, if we can get somebody out there right away.
Yeah, do we
What's-
have to?
What can we do
We
to
have to
get
do an
get somebody out there?
Yep. What we have to do, yeah, I'll take that.
And it can't be highway because they already said they don't have the time.
No, I
and
mean-
staff.
No, I'm talking about if we, if
If
there is
there's a
some,
field that can be
some field
used this summer, let's figure out what we can do to get someone on that field now.
Mr. Lavender Lady and she can irrigate using Goose Pond? Bring her own generator in?
Yeah.
My lavender,
The Lavender Lady.
Getting quotes.
the one we gave the tour to?
And I would,
We've talked to her. I don't know.
I would also say that even after if we go through a lease process, maybe not if we go through a sale process, the Orchard Working Group or the AgComs should have more of a say going forward in this, in how, if it's a lease, definitely, that the AgCom or this group or some stuff should be overseeing that lease rather than the select board, more on a more regular basis.
I think there was an AgCom working group
Yes.
which never met, which was supposed to be managing the orchard and, you know, I'm not sure that a town board, I think SVT.
Sudbury Valley trustees.
Yeah.
And you'll have to pay them for it.
I think that would be a
That
better
would be-
way to go.
That's more money, Steve,
Yep.
every year.
Wouldn't be no surprises though, they're very good.
But it would be for someone who's not a volunteer and,
Right.
right?
So I think the Board of Selectmen also just needs to redefine our purpose.
Well, I was unclear that any of you wanted to continue.
well, that should be part of our discussion on the 10th, is maybe it's something like Orchard Working Group for the disposition of the orchard or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think we need like new, clear, and different direction. Or the direction is, we don't need you anymore, but like, I think we fulfilled the original request, and anything further, it needs to be like a new,
mission.
No charge, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, and I'm still willing to help out, but, you know,
I think it's fair though, I think you want to know what the direction, what the
To what
mission
end?
and the goals are, in order to be able to confirm whether you want to stay on.
And decide on what kind of level of obligation to take on. That's very fair.
yeah, so you guys have a lot to talk about on the 10th. Yes, sir, name and address.
Bruce Jurgens, 153 New Estate Road. Does the select board agree to have a new mission on the 10th and discuss it and have it in place? Because there's a lot of talk, but I know it's come back. Is that reasonable?
I think it's reasonable to assume that the select board has no interest in dissolving an orchard working group that is willing to continue to be an orchard working group. I mean, I think the only reason we would dissolve it is if nobody was interested in continuing to serve on it.
And Bruce, we really can't discuss it tonight, so it would have to be on the agenda to discuss and make that determination on the 10th.
But I think meeting when the next meeting is.
The four of us.
Our next meeting is on the 10th. We'll put that on the agenda so that we can discuss it.
I think the four select board members are all, yes, we would absolutely like to come up with a new mission on the 10th.
In order to retain these talented folks.
Right.
So I know it's 9 o'clock. It's definitely getting close to my bedtime, because I'm getting old. Do we have anything else to talk about? So can we bring this meeting to a close? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Everyone's,
Which one?
Both of them.
thank you, everybody.
Sue's going to have a hard time figuring out the motion and second on that one. I'm sorry, Sue. I'm sorry.